The sun, moon, and other light sources reflect their light off of the sky. If your light source is visible in your composition, your sky and everything else in your painting should be brighter near your light source. Likewise, objects which are far from the light source should be darker. Always keep the position and angle of your light source in mind when shading to ensure that your highlights and shadows are on the correct side. And as I place these objects in, I'm going to keep in mind that the light's emanating out of the sun evenly, and so where it's coming out, it's going to hit these sides of this object. So I'm just going to hide my light rays there, and we'll go to our tree that's on the side, and I'm going to go ahead and put in my highlights on this tree and some midtones and shadows. I want to make sure that I think about where the light can reach and where it cannot. We have our highlights on one side where they're closest to light, and on the opposite side it's where we're going to have our shadow color. We can just sample some of our sky color and dull it down a little bit, and that'll work pretty well for shadow color, and just blend it up a little bit to give it some character. So light angles, very important. If your light isn't present in your composition, you can just draw on a separate layer a little sun or something like this that you can just turn off later. And if it helps, draw little arrows that come out of it like I did earlier, just to kind of help you imagine the direction of that light. And then it's the same thing with your shadows. Your shadows need to move away from your light source, the angle of your light source especially. So the angle of my sun is here. My shadow is going to go away from it. To get a better idea of how light works on a 2D surface such as the sky, we can use this lighting tool here. And the way that we find this is we go to Effects, Surface Control, Apply Lighting. And you want to make sure that you have just a new blank canvas open. And what you'll get is this kind of imaginary light here. This could be the sun, it could be a light bulb, it could be pretty much any light source. You can have multiple light sources. If you tap somewhere else, you'll create a second light, and you probably don't want to do that at first because it's just gonna kind of ruin everything. So if you end up creating additional lights that you don't want, just hit delete on your keyboard and it'll go away. And you'll want to tap and drag from the center of this white dot to move your light, and then release to place it. Now, if you think of this as a sun or a light bulb, you can control all the properties of this light. You can control the brightness, the distance, so you can make it look more like a sun if you want to get a feel for how a sun's going to work. But you can see it has this nice gradient, and this time, rather than being a linear gradient, it's a radial gradient on top of a two-dimensional surface. To get a more dynamic look at how light interacts with 3D objects, we can check out this Apply Surface Texture panel. And it gives us this little preview here that we can make some observations on. So to get to that, you want to go to Effects, Surface Control, and then Apply Surface Texture. This works like the other little palette we were playing with earlier with the light, where you can move it around and you can get a feel for how the angle of the light is going to affect the object. And if you want to, you can add additional lights to get an idea of how reflected light would look. You could take a look at maybe a sky color reflecting here, and then now you can see what a more three-dimensional object might look like. Now, not everything is going to be spherical in shape. There's lots of other primitive shapes, and we'll get into that in just a minute here. But this kind of gives you something to play around with and make some observations. Then when you're done playing around with it, you can just click Cancel, and you can try out shading in this way. So I've got a light here, and then I'm going to shade some of my spheres based on where that light is. So this is this sphere down here, so we'll make sure that the bottom's nice and dark. We'll put a highlight area on it facing towards the light. You could even do some little reflected light on the edge to really make that stand out. Go to the next sphere, background color on it facing away from the light source. And you can work from light to dark or dark to light, that's up to you. I just kind of chose to do it this way in this example. And highlight color. And then we'll do our third example here. And this just kind of, after a while, you'll just do this naturally. You won't have to go into any little panel and look at examples. You'll just see it in your mind and you'll make it happen. There you go. You've got some spheres that look three-dimensional. Now, it might be helpful to think of these spherical shapes as the same shape that we were looking at earlier when we were testing out how light worked on the flat plane. And if you were to take this flat plane here and then just kind of squish it down into a ball, you would basically get a sphere. Or if you, wrapped it around, and if you peel an orange peel off and then you lay it out flat, it kind of becomes a flat plane. So it goes from being 3D to 2D and vice versa. It's really just kind of, what you do with the object. But the principles are basically the same as far as how the light's going to react to it. It's still going to have a bright spot and a shadow spot that's going to be wrapped around a sphere if it's a spherical shape, or flat if it's a flat plane, or any other shape.